And we are back with the genius, the mastermind designer behind the OTB Open course, Mr. Leonard Muise. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
And you are the OTB Open designer both last year and this year. Can you tell us a little bit about your design experience and your time in disc golf, really?
Wow, I started playing disc golf at Huntington Beach in '82, long time ago. I was a Frisbee person who started a club, and somebody in the club knew about disc golf, so we took a field trip. And then I competed quite a bit in the '80s in the overalls when golf was just one of the games in the Frisbee competition. Fast forward quite a bit. I finally got a chance to do a permanent design because I did a ton of tournament temporary designs for Golden Gate Park in 2007. It's a great first course to have an opportunity to design, along with my good friend Ross Hammond. And then, you know, when that community got to the point they wanted to do a pro level event, the Glen Eagles course in San Francisco, we knew when we put that course in, it would likely bring the pro tour there. And so designed that for that level of play, and then stretched it even more when the players did come to town. And so I was working with Sean and Sean there, went great. And so when we moved the circus to Stockton, they brought me along. So that's how I ended up doing the designs last year and this year again.
Very cool. And it's a bit of a redesign for this year. Can you tell us some of the critical information that you learned from last year to help influence this year?
Yeah, I mean, I don't travel much to see the top players, right? I basically stay in the West, and so I see them once or twice a year. And seeing them play holes I designed just gave me a finer sense of what they can and can't do. You know, in a couple cases I missed it. I'm like, oh wow, they can take that route. And so that's always good, because I'm out there imagining, as somebody who never threw more than 400 feet, you know, what a guy who can throw 425, or what the women who can throw 375, what they can do with the disc, and what's a suitable challenge for them. So first and foremost, just witnessing and play my designs, it's a perfect test for me, because this is the concept that I think, okay, this is what I think is the right test for you guys, and now I get to see how you play it, and that's great input for me. So I saw some 3 or 4 holes where there were routes that I didn't expect to get taken much, got taken a lot. And I got some good feedback from individual players as well about maybe being too generous on some OB spots. It's like they missed badly on a hole and they didn't get penalized for it. And so, you know, kind of understanding the norms on the tour, as well as understanding, you know, the skill sets of the top players. So it's so darn good. It's really hard to imagine it well. So that was the main thing that I applied this year.
All right. And can you share with us maybe your top 3 favorite holes this year out here on the course, if you've got them?
Well, I think 2 of them are going to be last year's holes, because of the 18-5 made a return this year, maybe with tiny tweaks, a few feet here and there. So I'll start with those. So I still have locked in my head last year's numbers, so subtract 4. Okay. Last year's 13 is 9 this year. It's the one along the water. For the men is 438, for the women about 100 feet less. And it's throwing just as beautiful. For the men, it's an arching willow. And then the basket is perched on a very treacherous little peninsula right along the water. And I'm not so enamored of that because of how scary it is. It's just beautiful. Right, it's a great test. They throw a little soft ante and it flexes back. And if they aren't courageous on the drive, they have to be courageous on the putt, because, you know, if they leave themselves 40, 50 outside, then they have to maybe run it with the water 15 feet behind the basket. So I like the shot, but the natural beauty of that is really fantastic. Second would be the hole I think I favored last year. It's now 6, was 12 last year. It's a headwind, maybe a 1 o'clock wind, to a trio of beautiful oaks on an elevated basket. It's 368 this year. We moved it up just a few feet just to allow the crowd to get behind, since that's where the Party Peninsula is located. And then we also made a decision to have the FPO play there. Last year they played 70 feet forward of that, but the show was so good last year, and so much of the post-event highlights were of players throwing great shots there and the fans getting all excited, right? And that looks so good. I wanted to make sure FPO had that experience too. So frankly, as a designer, probably a better hole forward. If there were no spectators, definitely. I think it's better suited to their game, because it's a tough shot. There's water right if you let it go. If you flip it a little, and it's a baby hyzer flip, I mean, that's the perfect shot. It barely turns and has to stay there. But I'm really happy with the decision. Now the women will have the same experience, and the way we've set up the Party Peninsula this year, I think it's like 50% more folks. So it's several hundred people going to be within 50 feet of the tee when they throw. So that'll be exciting. And then I think my third favorite would be, I'm going to go with number 8. There's some that maybe stand out more, but it's such a pure classic risk-reward. So it's a par 4, throwing diagonally over a waist area. Men and women have the same angle, just 150 feet difference in distance. And there's 3 gates in the eucalyptus. For the men, the safe shot is the first gate, but even if you hit that well, you're going to leave yourself 420 to reach the basket, which is about 50 feet across a pond. If you take the more aggressive gate, then you may be only 340, which is pretty gettable for most players, right? But it's a much tougher shot. If you flip it a little bit, you could be OB in the waist area and be throwing 3 with still 575 to go. You're not going to save that par, right? And then the women, it's incrementally just one more step. It's set up so perfectly. There's now gate 2 and gate 3, where their safe shot is to gate 2, and their more aggressive shot is to gate 3. And I think the setups are probably 330 versus 260 if they play conservatively on the first shot or aggressively on the first shot and execute it. Just classic risk reward. The landing areas are excellent. And then if you center cut in this corridor of ukes along there, it's just a beautiful picture of the basket on the other side of the water. I will say, though, that, as is true in most golf courses, it's more open than I want it to be. This is a great course for putting disc golf, much better than most golf courses, but it's still, I wish it was tighter. So, that hole, if it was 20% shorter and 20% and 30% tighter, would be an even better hole, right? Then we'd be looking for the men throwing mids or fairways instead of 10 speed versus 13 speed, because it's a rip to the longer gate for them. It's headwind, probably 430 carry. It's that's a ways to go with treachery involved. I'd rather it be tighter and more of a pure placement if I could. But that's the story in a lot of holes out here. That's one of the better placement holes, and it's still not quite as tight or as finessey as I would like it to be.
Wow. Thank you for sharing so much of the course knowledge for our viewers. One last question for me, and I would say for the tour, for the Disc Golf Pro Tour event, what do you think the signature hole would be deemed? Which hole number?
That's tough. I mentioned 9 before, along the water. That's so picturesque that I think that's certainly a contender. 10, the subsequent hole, which is the bomber par 4, where you water carry on the first shot, then water very close to the basket. And if you go the backdoor route with the hyzer approach, it's water carry again. That is epic and beautiful, and so I think that probably stands out for most folks. And then the new one, 15 this year, which for the folks who know the course, is essentially reverse 3 stretched out. I'm not sure how hard it's going to play, but it's intimidating as heck. And it's a blind approach with OB in the distance that you can't, a blind drive with OB in the distance you can't see. And even if you place well, it's a high risk water carry, OB everywhere, second shot. So that's a very dramatic hole. So that remains to be seen if that will become a signature hole. I would probably go with the middle of the 3 I mentioned. Number 10 is probably still the one that stands out. It's so great to watch, and it emphasizes both the water and the giant oaks. And this is the one that Ezra actually eagled last year. He slammed it from like 350, which is one of the few, if only, eagles we had. Certainly not one of the eagles we thought might happen. It's kind of not an obvious candidate for that.
Leonard, Matt Rothstein, PDGA.
Hey, Matt.
Hey, we heard you mentioned earlier that you had made some design decisions based on watching coverage from last year, that you saw some really exciting moments and made some decisions there. I'm wondering nowadays how much you're thinking about the spectator and the viewer experience when you're designing holes, as opposed to just purely disc golf considerations.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's one of my favorite things about designing for this event. Usually I design community courses, rec level, mid-level courses, and there's a lot of complexity to that. There's a lot of constraints. It's not just shot making. There's all kinds of other variables, but there's a unique set of variables when you do in a big event, and I love it. It's just more information, more tools to play with. So yeah, I mean, and working closely with the Seans, they give me great feedback and constantly balancing. Hey, I like this hole a lot, but I'm not sure if there's enough room for media. This option over here would create a beautiful gallery spot, but maybe not as good a hole. What do you guys think? And we go back and forth on that a lot. Or they recognize things that they'd like to see from a production perspective, right? And that I didn't notice, and they ask me, what can I do to solve that problem? It's great. I love that, and I like it enough that I even, when I'm in my early phases of doing the rough layout, the rough routing, I'm also sketching where the staff parking is going to be and everything else, because I'm just thinking the entire site, even stuff that's not my responsibility, because those little things can ripple into, where are the trailers going to be? Maybe I can't have a tee there. And so all those factors are actually really fun for me to work with, and definitely very conscious of it whenever I'm doing a Pro Tour event like this.
Now, Paige hinted earlier that perhaps the distances are underestimating the elite FPO players. Do you take that as I hope to be proven wrong, or are you just curious how it'll kind of match up based on what you've mapped out here?
Well, I mean, my first criticism is, I don't know if this addresses her thinking at all. It might. My first criticism of my layout is too much uniformity in the distances that I've asked the FPO women to throw. I scouted the terrain as best I could, found as many shots as I could. It was 150 acres to explore, which is preposterous, right? I mean, normally 30, 40 acres is a lot of room for a course. And so I found as many holes as I could, but once I found the best holes, given all the other constraints and considerations, the majority were between 330 and 360, and I'm like, And I wasn't so much concerned of how many women can throw that far comfortably, because we know that that's kind of a tipping point where there's a number of very skilled women, and once you get past 360, they're throwing full power, and it's not a great hole for them as far as scoring, and maybe they're going to have less of a chance unless they're really on. But for me, it wasn't so much that, and I'll get to that in a second. It was, I just wish I had found better diversity of distance. So I have one hole that's right under 300, and all the rest are like 330 to 360. And that's just, and it's different wind angles, different discs, probably different flight shapes. So it's not the exact same shot at all, but it's comparable velocity probably, and I wish I'd spread that out. Having said that, more and more women are throwing much further than the norm even 2-3 years ago, and unlike last year, this is not a temporary layout. This is essentially a permanent layout now, because we've invested in these amazing tee boxes, right? And so given the growth of talent in the women's division, I don't think 375, which is kind of where, in my best estimation, I mean, somebody who doesn't throw 375 can play extremely well and win this, no doubt. But the number of women who can throw 375 comfortably, I think, is going up rapidly. And so if this course we're playing the same track 2 years from now, I mean, I'll make up a number. If there's 7 or 8 women now that can throw that distance comfortably without pressing, it might be 25 in 2 more years. I mean, especially if we're fortunate enough to have the Europeans play here. So that's part of it. I did see that it was a little longer than maybe I would have normally thought of, but I'm also designing something that's got to last as the skills advance.
Now, when you make a course, say you're making a course from scratch, are you thinking of to serve both an MPO and an FPO division? Are you conceptualizing 18 holes and then adjusting tee pads and lengths, or are you conceptualizing 36 unique holes?
Yeah, I mean, the routing, you kind of see 18 holes, right? And because the MPO footprint is bigger, I often see that first, because within that footprint, I'll find room for FPO. I can't do it the other way in many cases. Oh, what a great FPO hole. Oh, I need another, if it's a par 4, another 200 feet. That doesn't work anymore. So it's not a conscious choice to go there, but it certainly is more efficient if I see the bigger hole first, because the smaller hole will fit within. But sometimes the smaller hole just isn't anything I like. So take 11 minus 4. It's a par 4 for the women and par 3 for the men. I didn't like it as a par 3 for the men, but I figured out how to make it a good par 4 for the women. But yeah, I've thrown out holes that only worked for one or the other. It's got to work great for both. And specific to your question, yeah, these layouts should stand up on their own. I mentioned the compromise we made with the women on hole 6. That was more just for the presentation of it, but I'm not. I mean, what do we have? 16 unique tees for the women, and only 2 shared tees on the entire course. 3 shared tees on the entire course, including the stage on number 1. So these are independent layouts, and I'm thinking of the skill sets distinctly, and it's not just in the number in my head is 110 feet. Typical contending male throws 110 feet more than the typical contending female. But it ain't just that, right? It's the certain kinds of shots they're accustomed to throwing, and situations that their skills would match. So it's not just pure power that's the contrast. And so yeah, I think of them very independently. Other than the fact that for the sake of flow and gallery and everything else, it helps a lot to have them on the same basic route.
Looking forward to seeing this course in action this weekend. Thank you for joining us.
Yep, pleasure to be here. Thank you.